Hello, everybody. We are
Hi.
live, and I'm here with Sarah Lundquist. She's the composting queen. She's also finishing her master's in environmental studies at the University of Montana, and she is working as a zero waste education manager at Home Resource here, which is one of our local favorite places. So she knows everything that we're going to talk about today because I am a novice to the gardening world and the composting world, but we want to shed some light on composting, why it's important, and why people are scared, confused, and maybe a little timid to start the process. So these are the how-tos bring this project into your life and help the environment at the same time. So thank you, Sarah, for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we'll kick it off. First of all, why are people afraid of composting, do you think, in your research? And I think we've spoken about this before, and I've had my own conundrums about it. So why do you think people are kind of hesitant to go down this road?
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons. I think one big one is just a lack of knowledge of how to compost. I think people think that it's a really complex, difficult scientific process, which it is, but it can be made simple to do at home, so it doesn't have to be super complicated. I think another big reason is space. People, especially people who don't have backyards, or people who live in an apartment, or if you have a small space, it's hard. Or if you don't have a garden, even.
I would speak to that. Like I'm in a condo apartment type place, and I have a patio, but in my mind, it's like, is it going to smell? Do we have a place to put the bucket, where it's not going to smell? And what are we going to do with it after that? So, the process has come a long way, and there are definitely a lot of resources out there. Hi, I'm waving to Mary Ellen Kerwin. Hi, Mom. So we've got a lot of great systems in place to make this easy for people. So I think that's, again, and the time that it might take to see the fruits of your labor, right? So people go, how long is this going to take? When can I use the compost? So right now we're talking about, gardening is right around the corner. Everybody's getting excited, planting seeds, getting their plots ready. And this is when that compost is being used. So when is a good time for people to start? Obviously if they start today, they're not going to be able to use it for a while. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so that's the hard thing, is that people get really excited during growing season for compost. But like you said, you can't harvest it or process it overnight. So what I would say is a home compost usually takes about between 9 months and a year to finish and to be harvestable. So if you're interested in having your own compost in your garden for next year, start now or start as soon as you can, and you are able to compost through the winter too, so don't worry about that. And there's resources out there for learning how to do that. But
what if you don't garden? What if you're like, I'm not gardening and that's not what I'm doing? Why should they compost? Again, maybe they're not even going to use it. But why is it important for people to compost? And I think that's going to lead us into our next question about landfills. Because again, I think a lot of people, myself included for years, was thinking, well, this is going to naturally decompose. It'll be in the landfill. It's going to decompose. It's going to be going back into the earth. So why separate it? Why is it important to separate? And please give us a little more, interlude into that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great reasons why you should compost. So one big misconception about food and wasted food is that in the landfill it's going to break down. That's not exactly true. So in a landfill, food and organic materials break down differently than they would in a compost pile, and that's because those two environments are very different. So in a landfill, it's what we call an anaerobic environment, which means that there's no oxygen that's flowing in and out. So that means that the microbes and the little bacteria and all the little critters that are doing the breaking down of food, there's a different set of those living in a landfill and breaking stuff down in a landfill versus in a compost pile. And the microbes that break things down in a landfill produce methane gas in their process of breaking things down. And methane is a really potent greenhouse gas. It's about 25 times as potent as carbon dioxide. And landfills are the third largest methane emitters in the United States. So methane and climate change is all very connected to this conversation. Versus in a backyard pile, because there's air that's flowing in and out, and because there's a different set of organisms in there, it's not emitting all those greenhouse gases. But I mean, there's a lot of other reasons why you should compost, and many of them are environmental. And you know, one big reason is because compost is a resource, or wasted food, I should say, is a resource. So you can turn it into something really, really great, like compost that's going to be good for the soil. It's good for your garden. It's good for growing other things. And it even it's sort of like a carbon sink because of, you know, like because of all the plants that can come out of it, that create oxygen and take in carbon dioxide.
So it's a whole big like reproductive circle, you know, and it's aiding in that. So, you know, we have so much waste in this country, in this world. So being able to repurpose it, and I had that question. I'm like, will there ever be too much compost? What are we gonna do with all this stuff? But she told me not to worry, and we're gonna be okay, and we're not gonna be drowning in compost.
Which actually would be a good thing, because then we could amend a lot of soil. But
this is true.
But I mean, another good reason is because composting is so great because it's basically like nature's version of recycling, but it can be done on a local scale. So recycling is like this big international industry that we ship waste off to different countries and they process it and then maybe ship it back. But composting is awesome because that's something, I mean, you literally can close the loop in your own backyard if you're doing it yourself, or you can send it to a local facility that's going to make compost out of it and then market it to a farm or even to households here in our city in Missoula. That's happening. So that's, yeah.
I think another cool thing we talked about too, when, I mean, again, maybe you're not gardening, right? And you're just, this is something you're going to start doing in your own home. It also makes you really realize the waste you're producing and makes you think. And I think obviously right now in these crazy times, we are all, you know, at home a lot more, we're cooking a lot more. And we're also thinking about ways to change how we behave and how to become more resourceful, and looking at the world in a bigger picture. So I think this is a great time to figure out those resources that you can do. But we talked about, like just visually seeing what you're producing as far as waste and how you can react to that.
Yeah, and when you separate out your waste, you're really, like, you're just more tapped into what, like Katie said, what you're producing. And then a lot of people, that inspires them to think through, okay, well, how can I reduce this waste? Like if you're wasting a bunch of like tomatoes, for example, that you're not even eating, well, that's a waste of money too. So maybe you should think to yourself, oh, well, maybe next time I go to the grocery store, I shouldn't buy so many of these so I'm not wasting them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think now is a great time to kind of readjust and reevaluate how we are all operating, to take better care of our systems and ourselves as well. So always good to save money too in these crazy times. And then like going into gardening, if people are going to be using compost for gardening, how and when to use compost. So real quick, we've got we got Charlie here. Say hi, Charlie. And then this is a local company, Soil Cycle, that does a compost pickup and drop off, and they bring you compost at the end of the year kind of thing, and it's all on bicycles and they're great. So we love them, and there's a couple other resources here, but you know, you guys did this all year long and just got your first bag of compost. So again, it is a kind of a waiting game, and I think that again will deter people from going down the process, but you have to know that it's working in your soul cycle. But yeah, so they get their compost. It's, you know, almost Mother's Day, almost time to plant. How and when should they be using the compost? And again, I think there's a lot of different ways people can use it that maybe they weren't thinking of before.
There's a lot of ways you can use compost. If you're in the process right now of creating some garden beds, or like putting in new soil, what you can do is mix in, and you'd have to look up the exact recipe, and it might depend on the type of topsoil that you're getting too, but you can mix in some compost with your topsoil and then use that as your garden bed filler. If you already have soil in that you're going to be planting in, you can sprinkle compost on top of it, or you can, you can do that, and that's simple. Or if you want to till it in a little bit, you can even just use like a rake or something like that to mix it in.
Well, get your hands dirty.
Yeah. Or you can use it, you can use it in houseplants too. You can use it if
I've
you're...
killed all my houseplants, by the way. I don't know what's happening with this apocalypse, but all my houseplants are dying. I'm trying to bring them back to life.
Well,
Maybe some compost. I need compost. Jesus.
Yeah.
It's all coming around.
So if you're potting new plants, you can, again, similar to the garden beds, you can mix in the compost with some of your potting soil. And plant in that, or you can even just sprinkle some on top if you already have the soil in and the plants in. You can sprinkle some compost on top. You can even just sprinkle compost on your lawn too, if you don't have a garden or if you don't know what else to do with it. It is really good for your lawn. Also, though, I would say if you if you're concerned about having too much compost, which I will say I've never seen someone worried about having too much of their own compost.
Just me, but I'm new.
Well, people who have started composting are they find ways to use it usually. But there's always I'm sure that anyone around here has a neighbor or a local farm or something that would happily take your compost.
Well, and we have a local drop-off center too. So again, if you just have your own bucket and you start your own composting, and there's no pickup drop-off scenario, and you're not going to be using it. There are drop-off centers in your own town. So just do your little research and Google compost centers, and they'll pop up everywhere. And they, if you want them to come to you, great. But if not, you can do the drop off thing too.
Yeah.
And that's free of charge. You're maybe a little fee for the composting, like $7 a drop off or something. But
right.
in the grand scheme of
things.
Well,
yeah. And if you're not interested in creating the compost yourself, having a backyard pile, you can do a collection service like this. Soil Cycle and Recycling Works and Missoula Compost Collection are the three that I know of in Missoula, but
Garden City Compost.
City Compost doesn't do pickups, but you can drop off your stuff there. But all those services are available, and
What about starting? I know some of my friends just bought houses. We're all in our 30s, and everybody's having babies and buying houses. And here we go. We're getting our gardens, and we're going to plant our own vegetables. So some of them might be undertaking the task of having their own compost pile. So can you give us just a quick rundown of some good ideas for, how to encapsulate that? There's a couple different natural and bucket scenarios, and then, maybe what that looks like on a day-to-day.
Yeah. So if you have a backyard and you want to have a compost pile, there's different things to consider. So if you're thinking about bins, what kind of container you want to use for it, what I always tell people is, use whatever you think is going to work for you. Also, I wouldn't go crazy on buying something really super fancy and expensive, because composting doesn't need to be really expensive. So you can even just have a freestanding pile. It kind of depends on where you are. So here in Missoula, I know that there's a little bit of concern with bears and maybe some other pests.
Raccoons.
So there are different fancy bins that you can get that are supposed to be pest proof. I don't know that anything is totally ever.
No, they'll find a way, and they always do.
But that kind of leads me into. Sorry, this is
Go for it, girl. Get out there, do it.
So,
Teach me.
the best way I would say to deter pests. And I will preface this by saying that there are some good pests in your compost. Mice are fine in your compost. You just don't want them in your house, right? So maybe make your compost pile not super, not right up against your house. But they're fine in the compost, and they'll do good things. Actually, they'll break things down. But the best tip that I have for keeping pests out is to always cover with browns. So that this kind of goes into a composting recipe, and I don't know if we want to go super deep into that, but there's two different types of materials that you need when you're making a compost pile, and those are called greens, or a nitrogen source, and browns, or a carbon source. Greens are the food scraps. They're also if you have wet grass clippings or fresh grass clippings, I guess I should say, that are still green, those are also a green.
Dried leaves would be browns.
Yeah, so you can think of it in terms of color, although that doesn't totally ring true, because bread, for example, is usually brown, but that's still a green because it's food waste. But anyway, so you want to have about 2 to 3 times as much browns as you have greens. And browns are, like I said, they're a carbon source. So those are things like dried leaves, dried grass clippings, sticks and twigs, and hay is a good
poop?
one.
That's like a whole nother thing,
yeah,
probably. But I know a lot of people want to throw their like animal poop in there, and I've read that that's not a good idea.
So definitely don't put any like dog or cat poop in, because that can have nasty pathogens in it. Chicken poop is usually like that should be okay. I would do some research on that before, and some people
not human poop.
Not human poop.
Ever.
No.
Richie, no pooping in the backyard. I see you there. I'm talking to
you. Some people will put like cow manure. Like that's how a lot of big farms will compost, is they'll have cow manure or horse manure, and but the problem with that is that you need a really, really potent carbon source in that case. So you would need something like wood chips or something that is really high in carbon to sort of cancel out the.
So the industrial compost probably does have that in there. Like
yeah,
most
a lot of them do.
Yeah,
I don't totally know what the recipe is that Garden City Compost, which is our local big composting facility, does. But I imagine that I mean, a lot of the places that I've seen do use manure and stuff, and that actually speeds up the process. But again, it's all a recipe thing. So if you're using something that's really high in nitrogen, like manure, or really high in carbon like wood chips, I would do some research on, and there's like good ways that you can find. I mean, you can get as scientific and technical as you want with it.
Right, but the idea
is
your ratio was what, 2/3 brown to green?
Yes.
Generally.
So 2 to 3 times as many browns as greens, if that makes sense.
Times.
So like 2 buckets of browns for every bucket of greens usually. And that normally in a backyard pile will be your dried up leaves and maybe some hay if you have some, or straw, or dried grass. So those are things that like in the fall we have, I mean, just around here too, we have a ton of leaves that fall, and that's like a really, really awesome carbon source for your compost pile. So what a lot of people do is in the fall they'll take all that and kind of hoard it and put it in like big garbage bins, or like however you want to, even just a pile in your backyard, so that you have that stockpiled up.
So it does store pretty well.
Yeah, and I mean, it'll break down, but browns usually break down slower than like if you were mixing greens in it. So yeah, so you can definitely store that for a little while.
Cool. Well, as we close our conversation here about the composting misconceptions, any last minute tips or advice for people out there, novices like myself, to encourage people to get out and compost?
Yeah, I mean, one great resource that I would say is Mud here in town. I think I don't actually know if they're open right now, but they do composting workshops. So what I would recommend is maybe going to a composting workshop so that you can feel a little bit more confident. There's also a ton of online resources and guides to composting. But again, probably my biggest tip, and I have said this before, but is browns. Like that's probably the number one mistake that people make when composting, is that they think that they don't need to put in browns, or they don't put in enough. I would say you can't put in too many. It'll just, like, the only bad thing that will happen with too many browns is it'll slow down the process a little bit, but it'll keep pests away, it'll make it not smell. So there's it's really, really important to have those browns in there. So make sure that you have those, and when the fall rolls around again, pick up as many dried leaves as you can and store those, and so that you're ready for that.
Well, this is the beginning of my journey to composting. I have not been doing it. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad neighbor. Bad garden gang lady. Oh, but I mean, it takes these kind of conversations to shed a little light and demystify things that, one, were kind of a little scary, and two, how important it is. Because again, I was just thinking it would take care of itself, and you know what? None of it does. So I think we've all realized that. So we encourage you all to do your own research. Check out your resources in your own hometowns to see what they offer. Again, a lot of it can just be a bucket you pick up at Home Depot, and maybe you find a place to drop it off. I mean, that will, again, bring you into realizing your waste, saving you money essentially, and also helping the planet. And then if you want to support your local businesses too, where they do the pickups for you, I think that's a great idea. So hope you all enjoyed the video. I'm going to try to save it and repost for anybody that's joining in at the end, so you can go back and get the tips from the beginning. But thank you, Sarah, the composting queen, for telling us all these wonderful facts and making us feel more confident about compost. So thanks everybody. Hope you're doing well. As always, Charlie and I are here, so check us out online. Check us out on YouTube. Get the books if you don't have book number 3. Wacky Water Skiing is available, and book number 4 is on the way. So stay tuned for more, and hopefully more videos about, all sorts of fun things. So we'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
How do I turn it off? Okay, where is the save button? Oh, wait, and now.